Hello, everyone. I'm Aisha, and I'm so happy and excited to be here to moderate this fantastic panel discussion on the topic of digital twin technology. I'm especially excited because we have an absolutely stellar lineup of speakers, leaders in this space, and so we'll definitely be getting a lot of valuable insights from our speakers today. So, and in general, it's always super exciting to learn about cutting-edge technologies and their applications in the life sciences and healthcare, and how some of them can truly revolutionize things like drugs discovery through to patient care. So, really happy to be able to moderate this session today. So the topic of the discussion today, of course, is digital twins, which by definition are virtual duplicates created to demonstrate and model how systems change when new variables are introduced. And to kickstart the discussion, I actually have a very interesting stat here about digital twins. So according to Gartner Peer Insights, by 2025, which is just next year, 25% of healthcare delivery organizations will be including digital twin initiatives within their digital transformation programs. And so it's very apt and very important that we're having this discussion here, particularly in the context of personalized medicine, and also to learn more about what some of the most game-changing applications may be. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel today. We have with us Michael Millar, who is the founder and CEO of Verto Health, Charles Glaus, who is Senior Director of Oncology Precision Medicine, Early Clinical Development at Bayer, and Felix Baldauf-Lenchen, who is the co-founder and CEO of Altis Labs. Thank you all for being here. So to begin, Felix and Michael, I think I want to start with the both of you. Just to take a step back, I'd like to get your perspectives really on the broad scope of digital twin technology and going from their applications from the level of the molecule on the research and development side through to the patient journey on the clinical end. And so how can digital twin platforms driven by technologies like AI and machine learning really be the connecting piece between the two? And of course, with the ultimate goal in mind being supporting patients and closing gaps in care.
Sure, so happy to start off. Great to be here. Felix Baldauf-Lenchen, founder and CEO of Altis Labs. So to your question on how these digital twin platforms are starting to be used in various settings, our focus at Altis is to leverage the imaging data that is collected as part of standard of care and in clinical trials to better understand the efficacy of drugs that are, that's being tested in clinical trials, phase 1, 2, and 3 trials. When you think about radiological imaging as sort of a three-dimensional reconstruction of the entire human anatomy, including, disease burden, various aspects that impact the outcome of patients, like body composition, comorbidities, toxicity, adverse events. Those are all things that radiologists are able to somewhat quantify, but computer vision has, is able to do so at significant scale, and when combining that with other data modalities, provides an opportunity to be much more robustly quantifiable and measurable to facilitate a deeper understanding of disease and efficacy. So that's the space that we operate in, and where there are a number of applications that excited to get into during this conversation.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, I think when it comes to digital twin technology, I'm always starting my pitches explaining what digital twins are. So, really a good way to think about it is that when you look at real data and just analytical data, it's always a snapshot of this reality. And this reality moves at the speed of the time that you experience. Digital twins give you the ability to bring data inside the digital realm and then accelerate. You can start looking 4 or 5 years or different permutations in different ways in parallel. And so when you see generational stuff in AI and everything like that, digital twins use an aspect of that where by moving data into the digital realm, you can now run millions of scenarios against those data objects in a way that's more quick. And so for our work at Verto, we said, let's put the patient's data inside this digital world and let's extrapolate care gaps, issues, outcome problems that they might have based on their location, the environment, or different interactions that they have. And so really excited, the thing that digital twins let us do is thrust this data into a digital kind of reality and then create all these different outcomes and then bring that knowledge back to change the way that we act in the real world. So.
And Felix, when using digital twins as surrogates in clinical trials, for example, how has Altis Labs technology really helped to measure and detect differences early, and why is that key? And also, in what ways is imaging data very useful in the digital twin?
Yeah, so maybe taking a step back to outline some of the challenges that that sponsors face in getting a drug from sort of first in human trials through regulatory approval. It takes over $2 billion in over 10 years to do that, and the biggest contributor to that is actually the high failure rate that you see, specifically in phase 2 and in phase 3 trials. Now, if you sort of peel the onion to look at why do these failures happen, the most common reason over 2/3 of the time is because of the lack of demonstrating efficacy. And the question is, well, how do you measure efficacy? And in cancer trials, the gold standard endpoint per FDA is overall survival. We care about drugs that can help us live longer and better lives. So your question about surrogates is around, what proxies essentially have we had to rely on to approximate overall survival benefit. And for the past 30 years, sponsors have had to rely on tumor size measurements of a maximum of 5 tumors in patients that might have dozens of tumors throughout their organs. And unfortunately, these measurements have a very low correlation with overall survival, meaning that there are examples of trials that have shown slowing of tumor growth, yet no improvement in overall survival. And on the flip side, also examples of trials that have shown or have not shown the slowing of progression, but have actually shown significant improvement in overall survival. And that's where having a better proxy can really help a sponsor make R&D decisions of which phase 2 assets to push into phase 3, which can be billion-dollar decisions. And that's where digital twins, I think, can play a really important role, where you're oftentimes limited by sample size of a clinical trial, and models that can predict survival for patients and for a control arm versus a treatment arm can then help detect those very oftentimes small differences in outcomes earlier on in clinical development to help sponsors focus on the most promising assets and prioritize those to get those to market and to patients as soon as possible.
Thank you for that, Felix. Charles, I'd like to bring you in. And so being at Bayer, I know that you have a very exciting partnership with Altis Labs. And could you speak to us about that and what the motivation behind it is, especially since we see from small to mid-sized biotechs, and when big pharma starts paying attention to them, there must be something there. So what's your take on that end?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Obviously they have a sense of urgency and passion they share with Bayer to improve human health. So that's really at the core of what we're doing. And as Felix mentioned, in late-stage clinical trials, the gold standard is to measure overall survival. And far too often, there's a disappointment where the overall survival does not pan out the way that some earlier trial of that same compound might have led us to believe. And so while it's impractical to measure overall survival in a phase 1 or phase 2 study, we'd like to embed some measurable that's linked to overall survival as we go, so we're not surprised and we can have time to try to design better studies. And so, their technology allows us to do that. Also, when you look at earlier stage studies like phase 1, their sample size is powered for evaluating safety and tolerability, but they're not powered for robust measurements of efficacy. So often teams are forced to make a decision in what we call the gray zone, where you don't have compelling efficacy data. You might have some mixed signals from your biomarker data, and you still have to decide whether or not to go forward. So if we can include additional data in the fashion of a digital twin that's trained on real world information, we can grow the data we're using to navigate that gray zone in an earlier trial.
Thank you, Charles. And Michael, I'd like to turn to you. Of course, your focus at Verto Health is on the patient journey. And so speaking about partnerships and clients, who are some of your early clients and where is the digital twin in its early stages being implemented, and what are some of your early projects as well?
Yeah, so one of our largest first partners was actually Unity Health Toronto, here in Toronto. And the interesting thing is that digital twin technology kind of wants to have everything at the very beginning. You want to have all the correct data, all the environmental effects so that you can do as many simulations. But that's not how startups are created, right? So you have to start with smaller models and prove them against more focused areas. So in that scenario, we used that digital twin to address a consolidated patient experience across a multi-hospital system. But one of our more exciting ones that we've deployed with is Fraser Health Authority in BC. They represent 2 million citizens. And the exciting thing is we have 2 million digital twins in our platform now based off of their historical data, the diagnoses, the procedures that they had. And so although what we focused on with Unity Health was very much about the patient experience around an ambulatory visit or journey, now we're using our platform with 2 million people and looking at all the services that are offered within that region and being able to create predictive effects. And so the interesting thing about the digital twin approach is because we're taking that snapshot off of real data, we actually can create environmental variables that are created from the utilization of those patients themselves. So we can see changes in diagnoses that will lead to a system effect of under-resourced areas for certain clinical areas, because the data of the individual itself now has become the environmental data that affects other individuals as well. So like a good example is we can look at the number of people who are being onboarded into mental health or substance abuse programs, and then actually see based on geography that there's higher utilization in one area that will create a service deficit in that area. I should turn off my phone. But that's an interesting thing about digital twins where you'd be able to feel that. A clinician on the ground would be like, wow, why am I so busy? And then they talk to their colleague just 10 kilometers over, they're like, what are you talking about? I got gaps all day. But now with digital twin technology, we can actually say, okay, they were intaked into this program, and because we know that they're going to have these procedures in the future, we predict a resource shortage in a year from now for this area. And so the exciting thing is about how a simple concept that really didn't have environmental interaction, now deployed at larger scale, can let systems like the Fraser Health Authority be able to do health human resource planning years into the future off of real data that they have right now. So it's fun.
And so when a patient meets their digital twin, essentially, what can they expect in that kind of a virtual journey, and what type of information do they have access to?
Yeah, so it's an interesting use case, and this is where we stray a bit from the traditional definition of a digital twin. As we bring data from these different electronic medical records and systems, some people are just like, wait a minute, that's the best snapshot of my care that I've ever seen. So we're like, okay, we'll show that to you in a digital front door. But the real magic of the digital twin is that we're taking all the procedures, diagnoses, medicines, all the different elements that you have, and actually forecasting that against the different journeys that you have. So if you have diabetes, COPD, and you're also managing mental health, we track those journeys independently in our system, see where they're going, and see that how can we offer services to the patient, for example, in the community that will help them avoid a more emergent event in the future. At the same time, we can use that same digital twin and its understanding of the journey to inform providers about gaps in care, right? So often, you know, when you get your new diagnosis, you don't get it in a controlled manner. You get it through an ER visit. And when you're discharged, it's not like the discharging physician can think about every single permutation that's going to affect you. That's where the digital twin can come in play, and it actually can run that. It's like, okay, I see that you have a new diagnosis of COPD, but you have none of the supports to thrive in the community. It can identify those care gaps, inform the provider, and make sure that you get a better discharge into recovering at home.
Thank you for that overview, Michael. And so with 2025 right around the corner, a burning question I have for you, Felix and Charles, partners here. How soon do you think we'll be able to rely on digital twins in R&D? And also, can you speak to some of the specifics in terms of, we know that having, you know, surrogates in the imaging space, and how would that play into things like patient stratification and identifying subsets of patients that may better respond to certain compounds that you're looking at, and all of those permutations. So can you speak to that on the R&D end, and then also, how soon we can rely on digital twins?
Yeah, great question. I think the really exciting utility of digital twins will ultimately be in the clinical care setting, but I think it's still very early days, and the primary focus for us right now is on the evidence generation in research settings. So in much more controlled environments, like in clinical trials, where structured data is being collected at consistent time intervals with clear endpoints that are predefined. And I think the applications there are very interesting when it comes to sort of how they impact the research and the development of novel interventions. That's an evidence base that I think will then sort of follow into applications in clinical care. But yeah, want to also get Charlie's view on the timelines for some of these applications in the R&D settings.
Yeah, so I think for from a oncology standpoint, I think it would be quite some time until a digital twin could be used in place of a control arm in a study, simply because the prevalence of cancer is such that we can power a control arm. I think there are other disease areas, rare disease, where that's difficult to do, and I think that's probably where you would see use of digital twin earliest in a regulatory approved setting. I think for us in oncology, this is right now for internal decision making, so we can better understand our data. That's sort of the stage that we're at now, is using this information for internal decision around resources and go, no go. And then I think that the next step would be to apply it prospectively in sculpting the patient population we enroll for a trial. If you felt confident that you could identify patients who would better respond, we would certainly do so. I think we're not at that threshold yet, but we're starting to think about it.
And maybe just to add a little more on the topic of regulators, so we've seen FDA start to demand higher quality evidence with regard to overall survival in confirmatory trials, in registrational trials, but also start to incorporate other data sources like real-world data in clinical trials for approval processes, and new surrogates like minimum residual disease recently, So it's great to see regulators also sort of start to provide guidelines on other forms of data to support some of those R&D applications.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That was going to be my next question, actually, in terms of what the climate is like on the regulatory end, and when do you kind of expect to see bodies like the FDA kind of give the green light to companies and approaches involving digital twins and real world data? So, yeah, thank you.
I think that's really going to depend on the evidence being compelling for them to accept novel surrogates and benchmarking that against existing frameworks that they've had to rely on.
And so, Michael, in terms of the digital twin, deploying it in a risk-controlled environment, like you mentioned, like healthcare, how do you deploy it, and how are your twins vetted?
You deploy carefully, I guess, is the initial answer. I think that a good way to understand where is a good place to deploy in our operational model is in a place where there is value, right? The point of a digital twin is to take data in a digital form, run a simulation to help you avoid a risk or create value in the real world, whether that's finding a better population for clinical trials, understanding where they're going, or for us to eliminate. Our focus is on eliminating redundant administrative things like referral forms, for example. If you're able to use a digital twin to pre-qualify that this patient can use the next service, that's where we target. And so to me, eliminating risk without talking about the value that you create is very hard to do with a digital twin. So we always pair it. We say, hey, there is some risk in using a simulation to do this next step, but it removes this administrative burden. It creates this value for the patient, and we use that net value as a way to think of new use cases to deploy it. And then the second technique that we do is we focus on patient journeys. So instead of trying to create a wide-scale change of like a digital twin will predict what medication you need for this 2 million person population, instead we look at a specific clinical domain and we say, how can a simulation, how does our prediction about where the patient's going to go, how can it affect a problem that you're having today? And when clinicians get excited saying, oh, you can remove this redundant step, or I can be notified 6 months before this is actually an issue, those are the places where we actually strike and then we implement the digital twin intervention.
And so going back to that Gartner statistic, about a quarter of healthcare delivery organizations coming to adopt some form of digital twin technology within their digital transformation programs. We've talked about really the implementation in the continuum on the R&D end through to the patient journey. So I just, in a few words, I'd like to hear your final thoughts on what you think will be rolled out the soonest and what we can expect to see next year, as soon as next year.
We're doing reverse. I'm trying to deploy as much as I can. 25% I think is an ambitious target. I'm focusing on the health services side. I think that the health human resource challenge that healthcare is facing right now will create the burning platform for having to adopt technologies that make these simulations and remove assumptions that we've usually gotten clinicians to solve. So on that side, I'm pretty confident that, it will be deployed, and we're getting to the point where I could actually say just with our clients, we could get to 25% in Canada.
Charles?
Yeah, I think that you'll see a greater uptake among biopharmaceutical companies in using these approaches to support internal decision-making and investment on their pipeline. I think that using the existing images that we're already collecting for our trials is just a great way to get that done.
Felix?
Yeah, I would echo that, and I think the industry that we work in relies on innovation and discovery of new technologies to thrive. So I think there's a lot of interest and incentive in testing this out in controlled environments.
And with that, thank you so much, Michael, Charles, and Felix, for the amazing discussion and for leading the work in bringing digital twins to life in healthcare. Thank you.